Perfect. Okay, I think we're good to start whenever.
Okay, hello everybody. My name is Meriç Birol and I work at Hennepin County GIS office as a GIS technician. So, John?
Yep, and I'm John Nergi. I am GIS coordinator for City of Brooklyn Park. And you are here today to learn about leveling up your GIS game with Arcade. Can everybody see my presentation screen? Would one or two people be willing to just confirm that before we dive in?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, excellent. If at any point you can't see something, please just let us know. But yeah, so just to get started, let's talk a little bit about what we're going to do today. So a little bit of a prologue just about what Arcade is in case this is your first experience with it, but then this is really going to be a demo-driven lecture. So we've got 4 really awesome demos set up for you. I'm going to do the first 3 just to kind of get our feet wet with Arcade, and then Meriç is going to show some really, really amazing stuff in our final demo as well. Just before we get started, I did send out an email about this, but just to let you know, we are going to be providing links to all of these web maps and code after this lecture. So you're welcome to take notes, but you will get basically everything you're seeing here. And all the examples are doable. There's no special licensing or anything that you're going to need in order to do these. We are going to be using Map Viewer Classic. We've been working on this presentation for a while. We decided instead of throwing too many variables into it, we're not using the new Map Viewer today, but everything that we're doing should work in the new Map Viewer just fine. We will have question and answer breaks between each demo in case those pop up, and we'll also have time at the end. We would just ask if you have questions during this, just go ahead and throw those in the chat and we'll kind of pause each time and answer those as appropriate. So first things first, let's talk about what is Arcade. So this is Esri's definition. They call it a simple portable scripting language for creating custom visualizations and labeling expressions. But let's go a little deeper. So Arcade allows you to create dynamic expressions to use in map styles, in labels, in your pop-ups, and more areas. I like to think of it like Excel formulas, but better and more powerful. So it allows you to manipulate your data and do some really awesome stuff with it. Now it's actually, here's your bit of trivia for the day. It's named after the architectural Arcade design, not the video game. I have no idea how we would have made a PowerPoint theme off of that. So we are going with the nerdy video game theme here, but technically it's not named after the video game. It's named after architectural design. That's all we're going to say about that though. Now, I also think it's important to define what Arcade is not. So it's not intended to be a replacement for Python or SQL or any other type of full programming language. It's an expression language only within the ArcGIS platform, and it's meant to supplement the skills that you already have. So even with everything you can do with Arcade, there's other ways to do it within ArcGIS Pro. There's things you can do with Python as well. So it's not meant to really compete with other things that you can do with coding in ArcGIS. It's meant to just give you another option, make what you can do more powerful. It's not universally functional. Some of the capabilities are only going to work in applications that use the ArcGIS API for JavaScript 4. Certain functions only can be used in certain different parts of the map. It is a language that is still in development. So that's just something to keep in mind. And I think most importantly, it's not a free lunch. So all of this Arcade code is going to run on demand. So if you have code in your pop-up, in your map, when it renders, that's when that code runs, and that requires on-demand resources. So it's not this like magic that just lets you do whatever. There can be a cost to that. We'll see that a little bit in the demos we do today, but hopefully we'll also show that the little bit of load time is worth it for the powerful stuff that it's doing. And lastly, why would you even use Arcade? And hopefully the demos are going to show you why, but just to cover this, a few reasons would be it doesn't use credits. So if you're in ArcGIS Online, you could use analysis tools or other things to create new feature layers, but there's some pretty cool stuff you can do with Arcade instead that doesn't require creating new hosted feature layers. It doesn't require using analysis tools. You can just create new fields or create spatial relationships on the fly instead. like I said, it's on the fly. So it's really great for doing that with dynamic data. It's also really great for if you're working with data that you don't own. So if you don't actually have access to add a new field or do something to a data set, you can use Arcade to do that kind of stuff on the fly without having to download it or make a cut of data. And lastly, it's still a fairly new language. So if you're looking for help online, it's pretty easy to Google. If you search for ArcGIS Arcade and then type in what you're trying to do, you're going to find a lot of search results quickly that are focused on that, versus if you're searching Python versus JavaScript, which are full programming languages, it might be tough to actually find the specific help you need. And of course, the catch to that is that you may also be limited by the info you can find, but it's actually pretty well documented. So with that, that's most of our PowerPoint slides already, besides some visuals. So now we're really going to dive into some demos. So like I said, I'll do the first three. We'll pause with each one for any questions and answers that we want to do, and then I'll hand it over to Mirich for the last one. So this first one that we're going to do is we're going to look at doing some stuff with calculating new fields on the fly to just to show how you can use Arcade in a couple of different places. So I'm going to switch over to my map. Again, if anybody can't see this, just let me know, but I'm going to go ahead and assume you can. So these first three demos, we're going to use census tracts in Minneapolis, just because it's a very familiar data set. We've seen it in tons of demos. You know, it's the classic. We've got our 2010 and 2000 population with our race, age, and ownership variables in there. Now, one thing that if you've worked with this data before, you know, is we have the 2000 population and we have the 2010 population, but we don't have a field that tells us the difference between those two. Now, traditionally, what we would do is we would add a new field, we'd use field calculator to calculate that, and that would, you know, work fine here. But what if this data was not something we did have access to, or maybe we were using demographic data from the Living Atlas, where we know that American Community Survey is going to get updated every year, and we don't want to make a cut of the data because we want this map to stay dynamic. So if we want to do that, we can use Arcade. So let's open up our style editor, and just like any of the other fields that we could use to symbolize our map, if we scroll all the way to the bottom, that's where we'll find the option to create a new expression. When I click on this, it's going to open up our Arcade window. And there's a few different areas in here. We're going to touch on pretty much all of them. We have our actual Arcade window where we write our code. We have a test button so we can test it out. We have a name. We'll see where that is visible within your map. We have different globals. In this case, I'm just seeing the fields from my layer, so from my census tracts. We'll see that this can include other information from other layers in your map as well. We have a function reference where you can look up all different kinds of Arcade expressions or functions that you can use. And we have one here for constants. So things like new lines, forward slashes, double quotes, things that normally we have to escape. We've got some nice little lines here that we can use instead. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this sample code here. And quick little note here, you can see 2 forward slashes is how you can comment out text within Arcade. So that's the syntax for that. But let's say I want to symbolize my map based on population change. So if I scroll down, because these are going to be in alphabetical order, I'm just going to say I want to take my pop 2010 minus my pop 2000. And what you're seeing here for how this is being called is, think about like when you're configuring a pop-up, you use curly braces to call a field. Within Arcade, you use a global, which is the $ feature dot field name. So you're going to see that a lot. That's just how you access field values in Arcade. It's a little weird, but it takes a little getting used to. But once you've done it a couple times, you kind of just stop thinking about it. It's just there. So there we go. I want to subtract the 2000 population from my 2010 population. Nice and simple. If I click on test, I can see that I get a value back. I can see that it's a number. So that's great. But really what I want to do is I want to normalize this map. I want to get the percent change. So to do that, I can do just like any other math expression here. I can say I want to take the difference divided by the 2000 pop. Now I'm getting that. And then let's go ahead and multiply it by 100 just so that that number is showing me the what the percent looks like versus the decimal version of it. So there we go. If I click OK now, this is going to run that code. And we'll see that my map has now been symbolized based on that population change, the percent population change. That might not be super clear though, because I see down here for my symbology or for my legend, it just says custom. So that's coming from what I name my expression. So if I go back into the editor here, it's a best practice to always name your expressions. In some cases like this, you'll actually see those in certain elements of your map, like your legend. But it's also good to name just to help you keep track, because it's going to be really common that you're writing multiple arcade expressions in a map. So it's also just useful to you to name all of your expressions. So in this case, I'm going to call this percent population change 2000 to 2010. Click save. I'm going to keep it as is for now. And there we go. So that's just a nice way to easily kind of name my expression, since it's not technically a field that I have in here. And speaking of which, if I look at my map and I scroll down here, I didn't add a new field. This is just running dynamically. So I didn't change the actual structure of my data set. I'm just calculating this on the fly with Arcade. So that's great, but let's make this code a little bit more refined. So let's go back into our expression. I mentioned you can comment stuff out with 2 forward slashes. Let's actually use a couple of variables instead of just calling those globals directly. It's going to make our code look a little more it's going to make it a little easier to read, and you're going to see as we do more examples how useful it is to create these variables. So within Arcade, in order to do that, we're just going to type var space, the name of the variable that we're creating, and then we can assign that value to a variable on the same line. So I'll go ahead and grab my 2000 pop. Again, I'm just going to copy and paste because it's nice and easy to plug those in, and great. Now, if I hit the test button here, I'm not going to get anything back. And that's because Arcade, in some cases, it will automatically just return whatever the last line of your expression is. But technically, a best practice would be to explicitly tell it what to return. So in that first example, because it's just a mathematical expression, Arcade understands, yeah, that's something that I should return to you. If you want to be more explicit, you can type the word return. You can see that changes to bold because that's a recognized bit of code within Arcade. And then you're actually, explicitly telling your code what you want it to do. I don't need it for this specific example, but it's something I would recommend you kind of just always do, because then it's really clear to both you and anybody else reading your code what the expected thing is that your expression is going to return. So in this case, I'm going to write the same thing, but I can use these variables instead. So I'm going to do my 2010 pop minus my 2000 pop. I'm going to divide that by my 2000 pop and multiply by 100. It's the same logic, it's the same math as up here, but you can see it's just a little bit, it makes a little bit more sense because I've simplified. I don't have these $sign features, and I'm getting the same value. Again, we'll see in future examples or in future demos today why this is more useful. But let's go ahead and just click OK here. Map's going to look the same. It's going to re-render with smart mapping. But then I could just come in here. I could do all of the normal stuff I do with any field. So I could do my above and below. Let's say I want to show, above 33% either direction, and I want it to center on 0. I could choose my style, all the typical stuff that I might want to do. And another really awesome thing then is if this was dynamic data, if I changed values in either of these values, it would recalculate. So I'm not going to do that in this demo, but again, this expression is just looking at the values in these two fields. But I also mentioned this didn't actually add a new field to my layer. So how, if I want to format my pop-up, could I maybe also show that population change? One of the really nice things with Arcade is it's really easy to copy code from one part of your map configuration to the other. So if I go in to configure my pop-up, I'm going to use a custom attribute display. This is going to look similar to any other configuration we're doing. I'm going to show my 2000 pop, my 2010 pop, And then I'm just going to put population change here. And then I'm going to put a % sign for now. Click OK. I don't have a field to plug in there yet, but you can see I can just click on those. So now my pop-up's mostly configured, and I'm going to use Arcade again to calculate that population change. So if I go back in to configure my pop-up, within the pop-up configuration, you can access the Arcade window under the attribute expressions section. Again, in the new map viewer, it looks a little different, but again, you're creating an attribute expression. So I'm going to click on Add. I'm going to name this population change. And now instead of having to rewrite that code, I have a fourth tab over here that's existing where I can access any arcade that's been written anywhere in my map on this particular layer. And if I click the info button, I can even see what that code was, which I think is really slick. And then if I want to add it to this expression, all I have to do is click on it. And that's literally it. Now it's been added. It's now a field that's going to be available to configure in my pop-up. Now, if I click OK, in order to bring this into my pop-up, I'm going to use this syntax here. So within the curly braces, I'm going to say expression /expr. The first expression you write is going to be 0, and then every expression after that will just increment by 1. Now I don't have to hand type that. Just like any other field, I can scroll down and I can see the name of my expression, and then it'll plug that in there for me. So let me click OK. Click OK, and now we can see that I have my population change in there. I can, just like any other numerical field, I could go and configure my attributes, scroll to the bottom. Maybe I don't want any decimal places, so I'll go ahead and remove those. Click OK again. Now that's a nice clean integer instead. Now let's do one more thing. So I noticed that when the population change is negative, obviously there's a negative symbol because it's a negative number. When it's positive, it's pretty easy to infer that's positive, but maybe I want to make this I want to style this a little more. I want to add a plus sign if the number is positive. So let's go back into our pop-up configuration, and I'm going to add another expression. And this time I'm just going to call it plus sign. And I'm going to use the same code, but I'm going to modify it. So I still need the same variables. So I'm going to load that code again. But this time, instead of returning just the difference, I want to actually test a condition. So if the % change is negative, I don't want to do anything because it's already set up. Versus if the % change is positive, I want to add a plus sign. So if you're familiar at all with Python or any other type of coding language, you know there's that we're talking about a conditional expression. Within Arcade, I can use a function called the if function. It's IIF. I honestly don't know why it has 2 I's. I'm sure there's a reason. But I can also click on the info button here and see what exactly does this function do. So this is going to return a given value if a conditional expression evaluates to true, and return an alternative value if it is false. So this is what I want, because I want to test whether or not the 2010 population is greater than the 2000 population, because that's how I'll know that the population change was positive, and that then I can add a plus sign. I can, just like I clicked on the globals, I can just click on this expression to load it, and then it gives me hints for what should I plug in here. So I'm going to say if my pop 2010 is greater than my pop 2000, my value if true is going to be a plus sign, and my value if false is going to be nothing. Now I can run the test here. I might not actually see anything. I can see that it's outputting a string, but it just picks a random record. So because one of my outputs is nothing, it's not as easy to tell, like, is this running correctly? But let's keep moving forward with this so we can see how this works. I'm going to click OK. Now, as you can see, like I said, we've got expression expr1. So again, it's just the order that you write your expressions in is how those get plugged in. And I want the plus sign to go in front of the number. So it's going to look a little weird in the pop-up because you got these 2 replacements that are these weird like expression things. But if we actually run this, it's hopefully going to make sense. So again, if I click on one of these census tracts where the population change was negative, looks the same as always. But if I click on one that was positive, I now have this plus symbol that's being added. And there's just a little bit of an arcade expression running that's saying, well, if the 2010 pop is greater than 2000, put this in the pop-up in front of the number. And that's it. That's just a couple of little expressions to create a new value on the fly and even do a little bit of formatting. Now for another example of that, I have my non-white population. And this is something where, you know, I styled, again, within this data, I have the total population and I also have the white population, but I don't have a field in here that totals up the rest of the populations. So if I look at the expression here, it's going to look almost identical to what I did. I'm just using different globals and slightly different name variables, but I'm just calculating, again, the difference between the total pop and the white pop to infer what that, or to calculate what that non-white population is. But the other thing that I'm doing is within my pop-up, I'm showing 5 different data values. So the total population, white, non-white, the counts, and the percentages. And I just think this is actually really cool because if I look at my pop-up configuration, 3 of those 5 values are being calculated using Arcade, because I can calculate those based on the 2 fields I already have. I don't need to create new fields. I can just calculate them using these 2. So here's I have 3 different expressions. I have my non-white pop, which is just a straight count. So it's just the total minus the white population. I have my percent non-white. So this is the same that we're using to style the map. And lastly, I have my percent white population, which is just the straight white population divided by the total. And by doing that, I'm able to generate a pop-up with 5 values, but only using 2 fields, which I think is kind of neat. So very, very simple things that we can do so that we can just keep on running with our data without having to worry about going back and creating a bunch of new fields that we don't necessarily need. So quickly to review, we learned that you can use return to return a specific value. You don't always have to use it, but it is a good practice. We performed some basic math calculations. We learned to use the double / to comment lines out, how to use some variables to simplify our code. We copied existing code from one part of the map layer configuration to the other, and we picked up a function already, which is that if function. So I'm going to go ahead and pause here for a second just to load the chat. I don't think I saw anything coming through. So just a reminder, if you have any questions, go ahead and throw them in there. Otherwise, we'll just kind of keep cruising because we have a lot of really good content for you. But we can also pause if needed.
Hey, this is Catherine. I think it's really neat. I'm really enjoying this presentation. I'm just wondering, all of these, the statements and stuff, you're using ArcGIS Online and configuring a pop-up, but they can be used in ArcGIS Pro as well. It's like across. Yep. Yeah. Okay. Just yes, before I open it up and start farting around with it, just want to make sure. Yep. Thank you.
Yep. All of our Arcade, it functions exactly the same. It looks a little different in Pro, how you access it and stuff, but it's the exact same language between the two. That's a great question. Time permitting, we can show a little bit of that today. But yeah, that's why I said available across the ArcGIS platform, because it's not just ArcGIS Online. It's also within Pro. I think it's even within Portal and Enterprise and stuff like that too. Okay, let's play around a little bit with labels next then. So we're going to look at making some generalized labels and also looking at that we can use fields that we've created with Arcade to generate some generalized charts. So I'm going to switch back over to our demo here. So same data. This time, we're going to map these census tracts by median age. So I'm going to do just do a traditional style, map style here. We have a median age field, so I'm good to go there. I can just map this. Let's pick a nice monochromatic style, and then I'm just going to kind of round some of these here. Let's do 29 and 39 just to kind of group those by decade. So, you know, if you've played around with ArcGIS Online, you know, and in ArcGIS Pro now too, the ability to create unclassified symbology is really nice, because then you don't have to worry as much about like, where should I cut it off? You can let the map have a lot of different symbols. But it is a lot of different census tracts. Let's label these to try to make the data a little bit more consumable. So if I go in here and create labels, I'm just gonna label all of these with the median age as well. So this is a very informative map, but it's a lot of different numbers, right? It's kind of hard to read these and really figure out some clustering. You can kind of look at some of them and see, 27, 25, these are kind of generally 20s. We've got some 40s here, but it's just a lot of different numbers. So let's use Arcade to change these labels so that they are labeling the areas by the decade that median age falls in. So if I go into manage labels again, just like in the change style, if I scroll down to the bottom, I can create a custom expression. And this is going to load the same looking Arcade window as we saw in the pop-up configuration and in the map styling. So very, very similar. And it's already loaded median age for me because I already had previously labeled that. So I'm just going to turn that into a variable. Reminder that Arcade isn't going to return that versus if I were to tell it to return it, it would return that median age. But I don't want to return that. I want to work with that as a variable. So we use the if function, was really good for testing if a condition is true. And you test a single condition and you have a true and false. The difference in this case is I know that I'm going to have 3 different categories. So it's not a binary. Knowing my data, I know that the median ages for census tracts in Minneapolis are in their 20s, 30s, and 40s. So this may not be the best use case. I could nest an if statement and have multiple conditions tested in there, but it gets a little convoluted, a little confusing when you start nesting conditional expressions like that. So instead, I'm going to use a more traditional method of if and else. So if you ever done anything in Python or other programming languages that do conditional stuff, if and else if is a great way to do that. And you can do that in Arcade as well. The syntax in Arcade is going to look a little different, but once you know it, it's pretty easy to use. And again, we're going to provide all of you with copies of these maps as well. So you'll have this code. But if I want to do this, I'm just going to type if, and I'm going to test my condition inside of a pair of parentheses. And so what I'm going to say is if my age is less than 30, because I know that there's no median age under 20. So really this will capture everything that's in the 20s. Then I want to return a value, and the syntax for this is going to be curly braces. I'm going to return the string 20s. Now, Arcade doesn't really care about new lines and tabs and things like that. So if I hit this, it's going to work. If I just put this on a new line, it's going to work. If I tab it in, it's going to work. That doesn't matter. It's similar to SQL. It doesn't really matter. Neither does casing. I would just encourage you, if you have a way that you style your code, just try to be consistent in what you do so that you don't have a bunch of different random things going on in your code. But anyway, so we're saying if the age is less than 30, return the string 20s. So let's go ahead and click OK. And now we're going to see that all of the census tracts where the median age is under 30. So if we scroll here, let's look at an example. Here's 27. This one is also 27. But I couldn't do that again. It's just going to show 20s instead. But we have other census tracts we need to label. So we're going to say else if. So now if the first one wasn't true for the specific feature, we're going to say if the age is greater than or equal to 30. And now we want to say and it's less than 40 because we want to capture areas where the median age is in the 30s. Within Arcade, if we want to do an and, we just do 2 and symbols. That's the syntax for it. Age is less than 40. We're going to return 30s. Now I know I don't have any areas where the median age is above 49. So there's none in their 50s. So for this last one, I'm just going to do else. And I'm going to say return. If I could spell, live demos are fun, aren't they? Return 40s. So if the median age is under 30, label it 20s. If it's between 30 and 40, label it 30. Otherwise, we know it's above 40, so we're labeled at 40s. I could run a test here just to make sure that it's working. Click OK, and there we go. Now all of my census tracts are labeled with the general decade that that median age falls in. It's a nice pairing of generalized labels with unclassified symbology so that we can see in areas, we can see slight changes, like here in this section of 30s, we can see they're slightly lighter versus darker. But the labels can still tell us, but these areas are all in their 30s. So again, general and specific. Now let's switch over to a completed example so that you don't have to watch me write a bunch of different very similar arcade expressions. And actually I take that back. Let's look at, let's say I want to configure my pop-up here. Let's put in our median age. Just like always, we could plug in a value here. And let's say I want to now make a chart too in my pop-up, and I want to show the age breakdown. So I'm going to call this age breakdown. But now if you're familiar with census data, you know that there's a bunch of different categories that they're in, the age groups are in. So they're either 5-year, they could be 10-year, some of them are 15-year, but let me go ahead and just select all of these so we can see what a pie chart's going to look like with all of these. And I'll go ahead and normalize them by population as well. Oops, of course, this is in alphabetical order. There we go. So let's create this, click on a pop-up. This is just an egregious pie chart. Like this is just way too many slices for anybody to really get any good information out of. So let's use Arcade instead to simplify this and group some of these values together. So here's my completed example where I have a couple of charts, and I've taken all of those different age groups and I have put them into 4 different categories: under 20, 20 to 34, 35 to 54, and over 55. So these are our counts. And then here's our percentages as well. Much cleaner pie chart, much simpler to see, grouping those by larger categories. So let's see how I did that. In my pop-up configuration, I've got 8 different arcade expressions. We're not going to go through all these because they're very similar, but this is where you can see why it's important to name your expressions, because otherwise if these all said custom, it'd be really hard to figure out what are these all calculating. If I open up my under 20, I'm using a new function called the sum function, which is an extremely boring but useful function because it just returns a sum of values for you. But that is a function available within Arcade. I'm summing up all of the fields that will give me the population that's under 20. So from under 5 up to 19. And then the partner to that is the one that is calculating the percentage as well. So doing the same thing, it's doing the sum, dividing it by the population, multiplying it by 100. But each one of these is just grouping those together. And then when I configure my charts, I am able to use those arcade expressions to make my chart instead. So again, instead of having to make 8 new fields on my data, calculate them all, I can just do that within Arcade. It was really easy to, again, remember there's existing, so you can just copy, paste, and change the global fields that you want to use in here to calculate the sum for you. So not as many new concepts there, but hopefully still some really powerful stuff. So now we know you can use the if function to test a single condition. You can also do conditional logic with the more traditional if and else statements. You can use the sum function to add numerical fields together, and you can use arcade expressions within your pop-up charts. So pause for Q&A. I'm going to pause to take a quick drink of coffee here. And seeing nothing, we'll just keep on cruising because then we'll have more time at the end. All right. So this is my last demo, and then you can get a break from me talking and see some really awesome stuff that Mirich is doing with Arcade. So for this last one now, we're gonna expand this a little bit. So we have a pretend program for applying for grants for paying for your rent, and the percent occupancy, renter occupancy in your census tract determines your eligibility. So we want to conditionally format pop-up to give information depending on whether or not you apply to the grant, and then provide different actions that you can take depending on your eligibility. So if we switch over here, I now have our census tracts pre-symbolized. In this fake example, we have if the census tract is under 50% renter occupied, it doesn't qualify. If it's between 50 and 75%, it may qualify, but you have to provide additional information. And if it's over 75%, you automatically qualify for the grant program. And I can show that on the map with these 3 colors, but one thing that's not super clear is my legend. So I have my renter occ divided by house units, and then these not very super friendly decimal places that mean percents. So it's communicative, but let's compare that to if we were to symbolize by category and actually have those list qualified versus may qualified versus does not qualify. So to do that, let's jump into our style. And I'm going to create a new expression. And I'm going to call this % renter occupied. And I'm going to do my renter population. And actually, instead of making you watch me type this all out, let's just switch over to this example instead. I think this will be more valuable. So I have my renter and I have my housing. So in the past, what we've done is we have, oh my goodness, I am so sorry. There we go. We have created variables and then we have just done a calculation, but you can also create variables that calculate data for you. So in this case, I have an additional variable called %renter that I'm going to use to store the value of that renter divided by housing times 100. The reason I'm doing that is then I don't have to type this multiple times farther down in my expression. I can just calculate here and use this variable to store that value. So we've used the if function. We've used if and else. There's another function that we're using here now for conditionals called when. When I open this up, this is a really awesome function because it allows you to evaluate a series of conditional expressions. And the syntax is basically going to be expression, comma, value of true, comma, expression, comma, value of true, comma. And you can do as many expressions as you want and then end with the default value. So it's really it's a function that does if, else if as many times as you want and then end with an else. So in this case, like I mentioned, if the percent is 75% or greater, you automatically qualify. So I want the value to be qualified. If it's between 50 and 75%, you may qualify. And if it's under 50%, I know that that can be the default because if the value doesn't match either of these, I know that that value is going to be under 50. Then it does not qualify. If I click test, I can see that that's coming through. It's coming through as a string. So what I've done here is I've taken numerical values to on the fly create a unique values list that I can use in my legend and make that legend a lot more user-friendly to be able to read. So it's the same information. The map looks exactly the same. I've just used Arcade to clean up my legend a little bit. But I can take it a step further too. Let's say I want to put that renter population in my pop-up as well. So just like we saw in previous demos, if I come in here and want to add an attribute expression, here I can do %renter occupied. I can copy that existing value in here, or the existing expression in here. And in this case, I don't need to do the when, I just want to get renter versus housing. So I'm just going to do, or renter divided by housing. So I can do return. So you can see it's really easy to reuse Arcade code and just modify it to get different values. So now this is going to return this % for me. And then I can come into my pop-up just like I did before, and I actually already have that pre-populated. So if I just click OK, now that's coming through. Now, I could go in and I could configure the attributes so that I take off the decimal places. There's nothing wrong with doing that, but let's say I don't want to have to do that. I want to go ahead and round that off and maybe throw the percent sign on as well within my expression. So if I go back in to configure my arcade expression, what I could do now is I could say I want to round. This is another function we have. If we take a look at that here, this is similar to other round functions that you've probably seen if you've done anything with VB or Python. We're going to round a value by a certain number of places. The default 0, I like to actually put that explicitly just so it's super clear what it's doing. And now you can see it's giving me a nice round number. And actually one of the weird things with ArcGIS Online is it's still not respecting that, but that's okay but you can see that it has been rounded to an integer. But I'm not going to worry about that because I'm going to go in here instead and throw the percent sign on my expression as well. So now Arcade does allow me to combine strings and numbers. It doesn't always, so that's something you'll have to be careful with. There are ways to convert from a number to a string, but just to actually remove this first, you see right now my output is a number. It's an actual number type versus if I say I want to add a percent sign to the end, it'll do that, and now the output is a string. So Arcade is pretty flexible about allowing you to change the data type of the output just based on what you say you want it to return. And now since I'm returning that percent sign, I don't need to include it in my pop-up. Click OK. Now those are nice and clean. I don't have to go in and configure the attribute or anything like that. It's just returning that string for me, which is, again, it's not better or worse. It's just another way to do it. We're trying to show you lots of examples here. Okay, so now the next thing I want to do is I want to determine whether or not if people apply for the program, I want to give them more information. So if they don't qualify for the program, they're kind of done. If they do qualify, they qualify, they're over the 75%, I want to help them apply. And then if they may qualify, maybe I want them to learn some more information. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new expression to tell them within the pop-up whether or not they qualify for the program. Again, I could have the legend up, but instead of having people have to look multiple places, I want to put all of the information in the pop-up so that they can get it all in one place. So I'll grab this code again with my when, and all I'm going to change is the word qualified to qualifies, and we'll see why I'm doing that here. When I click OK, again, EXPR1, I'm going to come in here and now I'm going to say this area, I'm going to plug in my expression for the rental grant program. And just so we can see what's happening here, let me bold this. Click OK, click OK. Now when I click an area that does not qualify, I'll see that that's what it says in my pop-up. If I click on an area that may qualify, that's what it's going to say in the pop-up. And then lastly, if it qualifies, it'll say. So I changed it so that my sentence structure would make sense of qualifies. Now, let's do the same thing in a two-step process here to add a link to a URL. So now I'm going to do first, let's make some qualified link text. I'm going to use the same expression again. But now, if we know they qualify because they're above that 75% threshold, I'm going to send them directly to apply now for the grant. If they need more information, I'm going to give them a link that says learn more. And if they don't qualify, I'm not going to give them a link at all. This is not going to make a ton of sense until I've actually plugged in the link, but let's go ahead and get this in here just to do one step at a time. Here's my next expression. So again, you don't qualify, there's no text, you may qualify, it's going to say learn more. And if you do qualify, it says apply now. So let's go into our configuration one more time. This is going to be my qualified link. So you can see how many, we can continue to just reuse code to set this up. qualified link text. Now I am going to cheat with my Word doc here to grab some URLs to plug in here. Again, remember, this is a fake program, so I just have a couple different URLs here. If they do qualify, I'm going to send them to this page. If they may qualify, I'm going to send them to a different page that has just more general information. And then again, if they don't qualify, I'm not going to give them a link. I'm going to click OK, configure, and I'm going to just actually copy this. I know that the next expression is going to be EXPR3 because it's sequential. I have to actually, there's no drop down here, so I have to just type this in to say my URL is going to be generated based on the return from that fourth expression, which is expression 3, since it starts at 0. Click OK. So again, no link text, no link. If you may qualify, I link to this page to have you learn more. And if you do qualify, I'm linking you to a different page. This could be a link directly to an application or something like that, or a different page with information. But the point here is you can link to different web pages. So you're giving them conditional information based on their qualification, from what you know from the data of where they live in. But let's do one more thing. I'm nitpicky, so let's clean this up. There's this extra white space in my pop-up when they don't qualify. And that's because my pop-up has those new lines are hard-coded in there. They're going to be in there no matter what. So even though there's no link, it's still saving space for that expression. So let me bump that up. And this is going to look terrible at first because obviously it's just going to put that on the same line. But I can go into my arcade expression now and modify my link text. In my first demo, we talked about this constants tab where we've got access to just some constants that we can use in here. And one of those is a new line. So I can plug in here instead, I can say if they apply, or if they're 75% or more, I want to do 2 new lines. I want to do 2 new lines here as well. If they don't, I don't want to add any new lines to my pop-up. I don't even want to add any text. So I can test this. It's not going to really show me anything here. But now, if I click on qualified, it looks the same. If may qualify, looks the same. If I click on does not qualify, I don't have that extra space because Arcade is determining whether or not to even add new lines because it also knows should I be including a link and link text. So I can do all of that with my arcade expression to keep my pop-ups cleaner and not make it look like there's maybe something that's not loading in my pop-up. So it was a little bit more involved. So let's talk about what we just saw. So we learned a third way to do conditional expressions, and that's the when function. We use numerical fields to create a unique value list. We define the number of decimal places we wanted to output using the round function. We configured a pop-up with dynamic text based on conditions. And we also learned about the text formatting .newline in order to format our pop-up spacing. Again, not seeing any questions, so we're going to keep on cruising since we're at 150. So I'm going to hand it off to Medic now, and she is going to show you some really amazing stuff with now using Arcade to take it to the next level and use it to do all kinds of geometric calculations between different layers. So take it away, Mirj.
Thank you, John. As he said, I'm going to show you some of the cool stuff. And I'm going to share my screen. Can you see my screen right now?
Not yet. Let me stop sharing.
Okay.
In case that helps.
Can you see it now?
Yeah, I can see it now.
Okay, that's great. So just a second. Okay, this is my, this is a web map named as Minneapolis Crime Map that is created for this workshop, and it serves as a demonstration. So we are going to present how you can enrich pop-ups with Arcade, especially by creating connections between layers and by using geometry functions. So this map has 4 layers. Minneapolis police precincts and Minneapolis neighborhoods are hosted feature layers in our ArcGIS Online account. However, school program locations and police incident layers are live services. The school locations layer lives in the state server, and the police incident layer lives in the Minneapolis server. So police incident layer has incident locations, and it gets updated daily. Thanks to Arcade, we can create relationships between this layer and other layers, of course, on demand, without the need to download the data. So when this data gets updated, the map will also reflect the changes. This layer is symbolized as a heat map. The hotspots are shown as yellow. So this will give users visual indication. So let's move on to pop-ups. So this is the school location pop-up. The only information that is coming from this layer is the school name. Neighborhood name is coming from the neighborhood layer, and incident count is coming from the police incident layer. And I click on a, oops. Okay, I click on a neighborhood polygon, and this is its pop-up. Again, the only information that is coming from this layer is the neighborhood name. Police incident count is coming from the police incident layer, and school location list is coming from the school locations layer, of course, and the crime types are also coming from the incidents layer. So there is a filter widget for police incident data that we can filter by date. As I mentioned, when we set a filter on this layer, every layer's pop-up will reflect the change if they are connected to this layer. So I will go on and type downtown west, and it is going to open the pop-up by default. And just look at this number, it is above 300. And however, I want to see how many police incidents happened in the last 30 days. So we turn the filter on and we click on the polygon again, and the number is changed. So again, if we look at this map the next week or the next month, we will see different numbers because police incident layer is updated daily and other layers pop-up information depends on it. So let's move on to the police incident map that we used for this application. So right now you see the incident point and the police precincts. So as you can see, this is the default pop-up, and the only information we are going to use from this layer is the precinct number, like here in the title. So I want to know how many police incidents happened in this, like in each polygon. So I go to configure pop-up and I add an expression. And at first we name the expression as police incident count. And so I go to map. This is how you can use feature sets. I click on the arrow and there are 4 layers listed in this section. And these are the layers that we have in the map. So I'm going to create a connection between the precinct layer and the incident layer that we are just in. So I find the police incident layer at first, then I click on feature set by ID. And as you can see, it automatically created the code. So we learned how to create a variable. So I'm going to create a variable named police incident 21. And so this variable now refers to police incident layer within police precinct. So now I'm going to use some geometry functions. I create another variable named intersecting features. And I now type intersects, and you know, the color is changed. This means this is the right name of the function. And I copy this, paste here, and I use the field feature. So what this function doing is, it is going to find the overlapping features between those layers and going to assign those features to this variable. So again, I got the intersecting features, but I want to count how many points within each polygon. So I use count function, and you can also go to the function pane and find the count here. And here, as you can see, it takes only one argument, and I will just copy and paste this. And one thing that I want to mention, if you ever need to type, when you select the variable name anywhere, you are going to see in which lines or where you use it. This is a great way to check your code or if there is a typo. So I tested to see if there's any errors. So the result is number, which is perfect. That's what I want. I click on OK. Now I go to configure attributes. I uncheck these and I click on it. So this is something. If our result is number in an expression, it automatically adds 2 decimal places. So I choose 0 because it's not a double. So I don't want to see 0.00. So I click OK. Let's check. Yep, that's great. We got the number in each polygon. And so as you can see, some polygons are smaller and some are larger. I want to get the density of the points. And I want to see how many police incidents per square mile in each polygon. I again go to configure pop-up. And an expression. We already learned how to use an existing function. I click on this, but this time I don't want to return the count. So I type variable incident count. So, and now I want to use another geometric function. So I want to calculate the area of each polygons. I go to the functions pane. I find area. And this is what it has, right? So I go to the information because I want to use square miles instead of square meters. I go to here because I want to know how to type it. There are keywords, you know. There's no information here. And, you know, I find the unit reference. It directs me to the ArcGIS Arcade web page. And this is your best friend when you are using Arcade or looking for answers or everything. And I find this table here. I see there is this mile row, and I just copy this and paste it here. Okay, that's great. Now assign this to a variable. precinct area. So I have the area, I have the incident count. Now I want to see the density. So I create another variable named incident density, and I use just a basic math expression. And I return this. So I click on test. Yes, we got a number, but it looks ugly. So, of course, we learned how to use round function. I just want to have 1 decimal places. That's great. That's what I wanted. I hit OK. And I go to configure attributes. And so here is another way how to change your expression's name. I click on here. I say, please, incident count per square mile. And I want 1 decimal places. I hit OK. And let's see if it worked. Yep, it worked. So that's what I wanted. Now let's move on to school locations. So these are the points. And when I click on it, it looks ugly. I mean, and we don't need all those informations, right? Again, the only information I'm going to use is the school names, which is this field. I go to configure pop-up and I create an expression. Oops. I should tell you what I'm going to do. Sorry. So every school location falls into neighborhood polygon. I want to know which neighborhood polygon those points fall into. So I go to the configure pop-up and I add an expression. And in the previous example, we found the overlapping points within polygons, but now we are trying to make it create a geometric functions between point layer and another point layer. So ideally, we would create a buffer around, let's say, school locations, and then count the number of incidents or number of points that fall into that buffer polygon. You know, like we can do the same thing here without even creating the actual geometry. So it is pretty cool. So I, again, use, so that's the thing, with the existing pen, we don't have the tab here because there isn't existing expressions yet. So I'll just copy my code from the Word document. So this is the same thing, intersecting features and everything. So I used contains here instead of intersects because it is doing the same thing when it's polygon to point. So it's not going to change anything if it's contains or intersects. So I'm going to continue. So let's create a for loop. This is going to be fun. So for each variable f in intersecting layer, return f point. I go to the neighborhood attribute table, I mean field names here, and I want to return this field from the neighborhood feature class. And what this is going to do is, it is going to look at the neighborhood name for each item that are intersecting with buffers. I click on test. Oops. So just a second. I'll just copy mine. So that's the thing. Like you need to make sure every time. So this is why you should test. It's not working. Sorry about that. John, do you have an idea?
I think, what if you assigned that, if you just assigned the value to a variable in your for loop and then returned it outside of the loop? Would that work?
I think it was working before. But just a second, I'm really sorry, everybody. I'll just grab
Can you look at the existing example that you had? Like what?
Yeah, that's what I'm going to do. Yeah. Sorry about that.
So no problem.
It happens, right?
Yeah, free learning.
Yeah, free learning. And I would usually copy and paste, like have every expressions that I created for a reference so that I can use over and over. I'm just going to grab this. Okay, finally. So very good. So I hit OK. And I configure attributes. I uncheck everything except this. So this is the neighborhood name. And I find this here. This is the school name. And let's see. Yep, this is in Harrison. This is in Prospect Park and everything. It works. So let's see. I think I mixed the. So now we learned how to find the neighborhood name, which points fall into. Now we are going to create a buffer in order to find how many police incidents happening in each buffer polygon. So I click on add and I type the same thing from the existing pane, neighborhood name. And I'm just going to use, actually, I'm going to just refer to the, feature set by name. I'll just grab my code. So this is null now, but there's no errors. So I will create another variable named school buffer. And I will go to the functions pane. I find buffer and I'll just click on it. I go to the information tab and it takes 3 arguments. So this is the feature, which is what I want. And the distance is a number. So I enter 500. And now I want feet. So this is going to store the buffer polygons in this variable. So I continue. I create intersecting features and I use intersects and I'll use this as a first argument and then of course now this school buffer. And I want to calculate how many intersecting features in this variable. So I will use count intersecting and I click on test. Yep, it works. We got a number. And this is school police incident count per in 500 feet buffer. Let's see if it works. And I go to the pop-up. So there's nothing in this one. And there are 6 incidents happening in around 500 feet buffer. So this is great. But, so that's the thing. There are numbers of incidents showing each school locations pop up. Some are 0, some are 6, some are above 30. I would like to see different colors for different numbers. For example, I'd like to have blue color for counts 0 to 5, green color for, I don't know, 5 to 10, and red for everything else. This is possible with Arcade. So that's really great. I go to configure pop-up. I create another expression named color. And now I can use an existing code, which is this one, but I don't want to return this. So I will create a variable named incident count. So I grabbed these hex codes. Oops. Here. So I found these hex codes in Google. You can just, search for it. Now I'm going to use when function, and you just learned how to use it. And I'll just grab my code here and then paste it here. So if incident count is between 0 and 5, it'll return me blue. And if it's between 5 and 10, it is going to return green. And for everything else, it is going to return red. So let's test it. Yep, that's great. We got what we wanted. Now, that's the easy part. How are we going to color it? That's very easy with HTML. I go to configure attributes. But at first, I'm going to create a custom attribute display. I hit configure. And let's first have the neighborhood name. I choose the neighborhood name from the drop-down list. And I'll type incident count in 500 feet buffer. I find the police incident count and paste it here. And so that's the funny part. There's this little button that directs you to the HTML source of this text box. I click on this, and this is a very basic HTML. However, what we are going to do is we are going to use the font color function of the HTML right before the expression we just created. So this is a very basic thing. I just type font color equals to the expression 2, which is the color. So it is going to color the expression 1 based on the expression 1's value. So let's see, I hit OK, and I hope it works. Yeah, it worked. Blue for 2, and red for 11, and let's see. So I can even find green. So that's exactly what I wanted. Okay, let's move on. And so far we learned how to create and use feature sets, find intersecting features, how to count, calculate area, create a buffer, and read the field information from another layer with a for loop. Now I want to create a list of schools in each neighborhood polygon. This is not so different than the one we used to print neighborhood name for each school locations. So let's go to the configure pop-up. And as you can see, this layer already has many populated expressions. So we are going to add some to this list. Let's start with creating school list. So I have an expression here. This looks very similar to the one that we created in the school locations. The only thing is school locations had only like, they were falling into only one polygon. But here, there may be more than 1 point within each polygon. So we have to create a list and we need to iterate through each item. So this is how you do it. You again find a variable that's holding all the intersecting features between these layers. And I create an empty text named as school list, and I'm going to return it at the end. And again, for each variable in intersecting features, I will add a name field and of each item and add a new line character to the end of the school list variable. So, and then I will return the school list. Let's click on test. So this is the school list that I was looking for. That's great. I hit OK. And we already had this in the polygon. No, I haven't. I go to configure pop-up. I add school locations. And I find the school list. I hit OK. Let's see. Yep, there are 3 school locations in this layer and we got the names of them. So I showed you in the beginning that the neighborhood polygons had some pie charts. And we are going to learn how to create groups from another layer and then print them in a neighborhood polygon. So I go to police incident attribute table. So there are so many fields, and there's this offense and the description fields that we are going to use in this example, especially the offense field. So as you can see, there are so many different categories in this layer. For example, like robbery of person or robbery per aggregation, and then I don't know, and like automobile theft or theft from a person. So there are so many subcategories, but I want to combine them and group them. For example, I want to have only one burglary category, only one theft category. So let's do it. I go to Minneapolis neighborhoods, configure pop-up, and I create a expression. So this is going to be burglary. Let's say that I again create a variable with the feature set by name. And I will go to function pane and I will find the filter function from here. Okay, so this function is very similar to, the filter in ArcGIS Online or definition query in ArcGIS Pro. So it takes 2 arguments, the layer and then the SQL expression. So I create another variable named SQL, and I will type offense like text I'm going to use a wildcard in the beginning and at the end. So, so what is going to do is, it is going to filter the features by using offense field. When the offense field has the B, U, R, G letters, it'll filter the results. So I will use this in the filter function. And I want to create a variable named crime description. And I'm going to count how many features that are intersecting with the neighborhood polygons. So I type, again, variable named type count, and I count intersecting crime description. Oops. And see, oops, police incident 21. You know what? No, I will find the feature. So every features in every crime, every incident points in every polygons, sorry. And then I return type count.
Line 4. Yep, you just need equal there in front of filter. You have a dash.
That's funny. Thank you. Okay. I will just see why. So that's funny, and that's why you need to save every expression you create. Again, this is the police incident variable. This is the SQL. This is the crime description filtered by the SQL, and then type count. And let's test it. Yep, I got the number. That's great. And I don't want to change this code anymore. So I hit OK. And I want to change the decimal places of the burglary to 0. And we already learned how to create a pie chart. But still, I go there. I say crime type. And in this field list, I choose burglary, arson, assault, everything I created beforehand. So robbery, theft, and I hit OK. Yep, we got the pie chart, and this is exactly what I wanted to have. So, yep, I think this is all for this part of the demo. And I think we have some time for the bonus section, right, John?
Yep, we're doing great.
Okay, thank you. So far we used Arcade in the pop-ups, labeling, and symbology. There are other ways to use Arcade. So, for example, calculating the field. I go to the config attribute table of the neighborhood polygon layer, and I have centroids of the polygons, X and Y fields that I want to populate the coordinates. So I click on calculate. So I choose Arcade. It's either SQL or Arcade. And I am going to find the centroid. Centroid here. And I want the X attribute of the centroid point. I click on test. Yep, that's great. We got the number. I hit OK. it's taking a while. So. Okay, we wait and wait. Maybe we should move on.
Merrick, you can do this because this is a hosted feature layer that you own, right?
Yes. Yes, I'm not changing anything, any neighborhood attributes in the Minneapolis server. And those are the fields I created for this workshop. But anyways, it's going to populate the coordinates like you would do with calculating field. So I'm going to move on to ArcGIS Pro. So I'm going to, yep, anyways, I got it, that's great. So you can also do the same thing for the centroid Y. You would just type centroid feature point Y, and it would give you the Y coordinate of each centroid of each polygon. So I won't do it now. And I am going to share the ArcGIS Pro application project that I have. So this is census tract ACS data for 2019. So I'm going to show you where you can use arcade expressions in the ArcGIS Pro. For example, in the labeling. So you go to labeling properties, and the default language of this is arcade. I know you can use all these cool programming languages, but everything we did in the labeling in ArcGIS Pro, in ArcGIS Online, you can do the same thing here. So I'm not going to kind of show you what we did over there. You can also use arcade expressions in the symbology. So there's this little cute expression button here, and the only language available is arcade, and that's great. And for example, John already did something very similar to this. So this is very cool to create something like this with arcade, because if you wanted to get the density or the percentage, you would create a field, calculate the field, and create another field to get the percentage or everything. So this is very great because you do all those things in one step. So you can also, verify the code, so there's no errors. But I'm not going to go there because this is ArcGIS Pro, may take a while. So I will move on to calculate a field. And I'm just going to choose a random field. You can use arcade here as well. But there is something very cool about this. You can use feature sets, but they have to be stored in one data store, like in one geodatabase. And I'm going to show you something very complicated. Okay, this is going to look very ugly, I can assure you. Can you see the Word document that I'm showing? Okay, this is something I created for a school project. It doesn't make any sense for now because it's very complicated, I know that. And now I'm thinking, actually, I didn't care about the result of this project. I just wanted to see what arcade is capable of. So that's the crazy part. You can paste this whole code in one field, calculate field code block, and it'll work. So it's here it gets the feature set by name, and it filters the this parcel tracked feature class, if it has commercial or comma field, comma text in PR type NM1 field, and it finds intersecting features, and it gets the area in square meters. This is for the commercial parcels. This is for the residential, and this is for the industrial and everything. And there are even more things like how to create the length of the intersecting features for the sidewalks, like everything you can do in ArcGIS Online, you can have everything in one code block in ArcGIS Pro. Rather than doing all these steps one by one, you can create a huge code block like this. It doesn't matter if it's this or not, but I wanted to show you what Arcade is capable of. So I know it has limitations, but I think it's still worth to use it. So I think this is all I had, John.
Awesome. Thank you, Medic. That is, yeah, that's super fun. And I could see like having that complicated code though, but if it's something that you're going to, it makes me think about like, I have Python scripts to process parcel data every month. Like it's awesome to see an example of using Arcade to do a lot of really complicated stuff that you may want to do frequently. So you can have that like set it and forget it, like just run this code whenever you need to do all those calculations. Yeah. That's really, really cool.
Yeah, and I try to use this huge code in ArcGIS Online with calculating a field. It crashed every single time. So I just used this code in ArcGIS Pro. It took a while, maybe hours, but it didn't crash ever.
That's awesome.
So I don't know, I think it's useful, but anyways, I'm going back to the slide. So far we learned how to create connections between layers with feature sets. And we learned how to count number of overlapping features with count function. We also used area function to calculate polygon areas in different units. And also, again, we learned how to create buffers around features with buffer function. And we used filter function to target certain records. And finally, we learned how to use for loop to create a list of overlapping features of the layer. So
a lot.
A lot.
At least. Yep. Awesome. All right. Well, that concludes our demos, but let's just talk a little bit before we open it up to any closing questions. We got plenty of time. So just a reminder, we've said this multiple times, but Arcade's still in development. Not all the functionality is available in all areas yet, but it is something Esri is continuing to work on. So if you can't do it now, you can always go on GeoNet and say, it'd be nice to be able to do this here. It is covered by Esri technical support. So if you have issues with your code not working, it is something you can submit a ticket for. I've done that a few times. There's also a really great online community and GeoNet for finding code. There's really great code samples out there, troubleshooting help. And again, just that reminder, this is not a free lunch. As you saw, Medic, her examples did some really, really amazing thing. It slowed the pop-ups down a little, but I would argue that that was more than worth it. So to show all of that amazing information in one pop-up. So just keep in mind that you may run into a balancing act of how much stuff do you want to do dynamically versus how long is it going to take your pop-ups and other areas to do those things. So with that brings us to our last slide. Here's our contact information. Happy to have you reach out with any follow-up questions. Obviously, we have time to handle those now too. Full guide available at the developer site, which is fantastic. The Esri blog, I posted that in the chat actually. If you just search the Esri blog for Arcade, there's a bunch of really awesome posts. if books are your thing, David Allen wrote a really good book on writing arcade expressions, and that does cover both ArcGIS Online and ArcGIS Pro. But yeah, with that, thank you so much for attending. We've got plenty of time. I will probably end the recording at this point, but otherwise, if you have any questions, feel free to either type them in the chat, or if you'd like to, you can also just unmute yourself if you'd like to do that too. So thank you.